This is part 16 of the Preparing for the Time of Trouble seminar series. Parts 7 through 15 dealt with Daniel 12, which we now know is Jacob's time of trouble through to the return of Jesus. But Daniel 12 is not a standalone prophecy. It goes clear back to parts of Daniel 10. So the prophecy provided by Jesus to Daniel was recorded in Daniel 10, 11, and 12. So we're going to do an overview here of the earlier part of Daniel 11. Daniel 11 is a quite complicated prophecy and has not been interpreted very much by theologians. They kind of seem to stay away from it. Seventh-day Adventists are also ones that have kind of shied away from Daniel 11. And that's probably due to the fact that Ellen White in the Spirit of Prophecy basically has no interpretation, no explanation of Daniel 11, with the exception of this first part and the fact that she says over and over again that we need to understand Daniel 11. But I believe that God did not reveal all of, particularly the latter part of Daniel 11, to her. So this segment, this part 16, is going to be an overview of the first major part of Daniel 11. And then the next segment, we're going to focus on the last verses 40 to 45, which I think are very significant. So you will recall that in our last segment, we looked at different theologians' interpretations of the end of Daniel 12, of how long would the time of trouble be. And this is where we left off last time. The thing that's significant about Daniel 12 is it starts with Michael standing up, which we have learned is the close of probation and the beginning of the time of trouble. So consequently, we're missing information about everything prior to the close of probation, namely the world history up to and then including the little time of trouble when you can't buy or sell. So I have made this chart to help you visualize the prophecy that was given by Jesus to Daniel in Daniel 10 through 12. You'll see on the left that Daniel 10:14 to 11:39, which is what we're going to study in this part, is a repeat and expansion of the world powers as given to Daniel in previous visions. All of the visions Daniel had in the book of Daniel had to do with these sequence of powers: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, divided Europe, papal Rome. And then at the end of Daniel 11, which we're going to study in the next part, we talk about the gap in between Michael standing up in the beginning of Daniel 12 and the papal supremacy in the divided Rome. So this portion, we're gonna look at how Daniel 11 is a clone, if you will, of the other prophecies in Daniel having to do with these world kingdoms. So here's the illustration showing the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had in Daniel 2. And you will, I'm sure, be familiar with the head of gold, the silver chest, the brass thighs, the iron legs, and the feet being a mixture of iron and clay, ending with the stone coming and breaking the kingdom down. And we know from Daniel's own being told the interpretation of this, which he explained to Nebuchadnezzar, that Nebuchadnezzar Babylon was the head of gold. Medo-Persia would be the next. Greece, Rome, divided kingdoms during the 1260 years, and investigative judgment and Christ's kingdom. Now, what I'm trying to show you is that the next prophecy in Daniel 7, is a clone of the same sequence of kingdoms. So here we see, and same with Daniel 8 and 9. So notice that Babylon, which was the head of gold in Daniel 2, is the lion in Daniel 7. Daniel 8 doesn't show it because by the time Daniel had that vision, it was already past history. The silver chest was Medo-Persia, which is the bear with the things in his mouth, and the ram in Daniel 8. So you can see there's a parallel all the way down through between Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Daniel 8. So Daniel 12 is the end of a long prophecy given by Jesus to Daniel. The entire vision is Daniel 10 through 12. The end of Daniel 11 brings into play in an end time scenario the king of the north and the king of the south, which we're going to delve into in detail in the next part of this sequence, part 17. So this is the last part. And just to give you a preview, the king of the north shall come. He shall enter the glorious land. He shall have power over Egypt, also the Libyans and the Ethiopians. He shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. The king of the north will come. He will enter the glorious land. He shall have power over Egypt, also the Libyans and the Ethiopians. He shall plant his tents in the palace between the seas and the holy mountain. So, Daniel's is a 3-chapter vision. And here we begin at Daniel 10, verse 1. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. By the way, the reason he had 2 names is one was his Hebrew name, and one was the name assigned to him as a captive in Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. And so he was given in the 3rd year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, he was given this last vision that's recorded in Daniel 10 through 12. You'll notice he's already in the kingdom of Persia. He's long, Babylon is past history. So those whose name was Belteshazzar, the thing was true, and the time appointed was long. You will see why the time appointed was long. Verse 14 says, and now I come to make thee, this is Jesus talking, understand what will befall thy people, the Hebrews, in the last days, for yet the vision is many days. Once again, it's saying this is a long, long vision. So here we have, again, a visualization of Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, and Daniel 9, with these different interpretations of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, etc. And when we get to Daniel 11, because he's already now in Medo-Persia time, Babylon is past history, just like it was in 8 and 9. So there is no reference to Babylon because it's past history. And the sequence begins with Medo-Persia, Greece, Imperial Rome, and so forth. The question is, I always understood that these world powers were the one world government. That's the way I pictured them. Babylon, one world government. Medo-Persia, one world government. Actually, that doesn't appear to be the case because there were other world empires that were large. The Mongol Empire, for instance, was actually larger than the ones we have in Daniel. Russia, Ming Dynasty, Incans, for instance. So the question is, why didn't God mention these other world empires? And I believe the reason is because this is talking about the world empires that have an impact on God's people, namely Israelites. So notice Babylon is in proximity to the north of Israel. Medo-Persia, for the most part, north, but partly south of Israel. Greece is north of Israel, and so is Rome. So you can see that the reason Daniel was told about these particular world powers, the then known world for his world, was because they all had a significant impact, many times negatively, on God's chosen people in Israel. Daniel 10:21, but I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael, your prince. We learned in part 7 that Michael is Jesus. So the first kingdom was Babylon, and Babylon, as we see in this chart, is not referenced in Daniel 11 because it was past history, because as we just showed, this was in the third year in the Medo-Persia Empire when Daniel was given the vision. So we start with verse 2, and again, these different represented in each chapter by different symbolism. And in Daniel 11's case, Medo-Persia is represented by the four kings, starting in verse 2. So Medo-Persia, this is Daniel 2. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia. See, there's the name. And the fourth shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he will stir up all against the realm of Greece. So we are looking at Persia and Greece, the transition. So notice Daniel 10:1 on the right-hand side was in the third year of Cyrus, the king of Persia. That's when the vision was given to Daniel. Daniel 11:2, he records, and now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will rise in Persia. So it's still talking about Persia. And the vision started in Daniel 10, but when we get to the beginning of Daniel 11, we're still talking about the kingdom of Medo-Persia. But there would be a fourth power that would come along. Here's the 3 more kings, and then we have a fourth one. And then Daniel 2, Artaxerxes, Xerxes 1, which is actually the Ahasuerus of the book of Esther. This is the strong king that's being talked about at the end of verse 2. By his strength through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. So here is the kingdom of Medo-Persia, and he stirred up, Ahasuerus did, he stirred up a 1,000,000-man army, and he got soldiers from Egypt, the Jews, the Assyrians, the Phoenicians, Babylonians, and Indians. And his goal was to take out Greece, particularly Athens. So he attacked there with that 1,000,000-man army into Greece. They knew he was coming, so he was not completely successful. But the significance is that Daniel knew ahead of time that this mighty king in verses 3 through 13 in chapter 11 was going to be an attempt to take over Greece by Medo-Persia, but ultimately it did not work, and Greece became the world dominant power. Mighty king will rise, verse 3, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. So this is talking about Alexander the Great. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided into 4 winds, but not many his posterity, nor according to his dominion from which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others besides these. So when Alexander, you can see he didn't live very long. He was a young, extremely successful warrior, but he died young. And when he died, he had generals under him who, would assume one of them would take over, but he basically said, you guys fight it out. And so they did. So here are the 4 generals. And what the book of Daniel pays attention to is the 2 that ended up being significant to Israel. Even though there were 4 generals that divided up the kingdom, there were 2 of them that were of significance to the Israel, and they became the king of the north and the king of the south. So in Daniel 5 it says, also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, He shall gain power over him and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great one. So we're talking about the king of the south. And at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. So they had this alliance, an intermarriage situation, but she shall not retain the power of her authority. Neither he or authority shall stand, and she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthens her in those days. So I go into a lot of detail, but basically there was a family food fight at this stage, and in order to try to gain power, there was one family member killing another family member, and over. And so in verse 6 of Daniel 11, it says, "But she shall not retain the power of her authority, neither he or his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in these times." It continues in verse 7 and 8, "But from the branch of her roots shall one rise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north," there's that king of the north again, "and deal with them and prevail." So here we have another power struggle going on. And in verse 9 it says, "And the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, and shall return to his own land." So we get this battle between the king of the north, king of the south. They made an alliance, and then things fell apart, and there was a bunch of family killing each other. And then the king of the north came to the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So king of the north tried to have a power struggle, and it didn't work. Verse 10, "However, his sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm them and pass through, and he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife." So here we have Antiochus III the Great making all kinds of trouble. Verse 11, "The king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight against him, and the king of the north with the king of the north, and he shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given to the land of his enemy." So here we have another attempted battle, and it didn't work out the way they planned on it. Verse 12 to 13, "When he's given away the multitude, his heart will be filled up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail." So there was a huge loss of life in an attempt to be successful, and it didn't work. "For the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former. He will certainly come to the end of some years with a great army and much equipment." So now we get to pagan Rome. And so we look at the chart, and pagan Rome starts in verse 14, called the king of the north, pagan Rome. Notice that these kingdoms are north of Israel, so they are the king of the north, typically. So here we're in verse 14 to 15. "And now in those times many shall arise against the king of the south." So the king of the north is trying to go against the king of the south. "Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fail." Daniel 11:14, "So the king of the north shall come and build a besiege mound and take the fortified city. And the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist." So here's a battle between the king of the north, king of the south, and it is a successful battle. Verse 16, "But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power." Verse 17, "He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but he shall not stand with him, nor be with him." Verse 18, "After this he will turn his face to the coastlands, and he will take many, but a ruler of his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease to nothing. He shall turn his reproach back upon them. Verse 19, then he will turn his face towards the fortress of his own land, and he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Daniel 11, verse 20, there shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, that is Israel, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. So this particular power is going to tax the people, tax the Israel people, and but he's not going to last very long, and he's not going to die of normal means. Luke 2, 1 through 3 picks up on this because this is when Jesus is born. It came to pass in those days, he went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. So you can see that Jesus is fitting into this Rome sequence of world powers that affect God's people. So Daniel 11:21 says, and in his place, so Caesar Augustus dies, in his place will rise a vile person, in whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. Uriah Smith talks about this in the book Daniel and Revelation. It is recorded that as Augustus was about to nominate his successor, his wife, Livia, besought him to nominate Tiberius, her son of a former husband. But the emperor said, your son is too vile to wear the purple robe. Instead, nomination was given to Agrippa. So Daniel 11:21 says, and in his place shall arise a vile person, in whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. Daniel 11:22, with the force of the flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. So this is where we get the Europe being divided up. Rome fell, and instead of it being a new successor, the various generals divided it up, and we know there were 10 different governments, 10 different countries that have become Europe in modern day. So the next power that comes in these statues and these visions is Papal Rome. So you can see that now Papal Rome is coming along during this dividing of the 10 kingdoms. We know from chapter 7 that's the little horn of Daniel. So Revelation 13 talks about this in verses 3 through 6. And I saw one of the heads that were wounded to death. Deadly wound was healed, and all the world wandered after the beast. They worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? There was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. We know from our previous study that's 1260 years of Bible prophecy of the Dark Ages when Papal Rome was in power and the persecutions of Bible-believing Christians happened, and martyrs and burning at the stake and hiding in the caves and all of that. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. So in Daniel 11:31, it talks about the forces will be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress, and then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. You will recognize the abomination of desolation is what Jesus mentioned in Matthew 24 to the disciples as one of the signs when they were to flee Jerusalem. And we talked about that in part 6 of Preparing for the Time of Trouble seminar series, if you want more information. So I want to mention, it talked about taking away the daily sacrifices. The word sacrifices is supplied. It wasn't in the original script. So it would read, then they shall take away the daily. Okay, so here are some significant things to think about. We won't go into detail about the daily, but it is a point of interest. There were daily sacrifices. This has to do with these pieces of furniture in the sanctuary. So the first one was in the upper left corner there was where the sacrifices were done. Table of showbread. That's the one on the right upper. That was a daily activity. The lamps that burnt daily, and the golden altar. So we've got the 7 golden candlesticks, and we've got the golden altar. So all of these had to do with a daily activity in the temple. Equally significant, though, is that because Papal Rome came in and was persecuting Christians, that's when Martin Luther came onto the scene. He was a clergy, a doctor, trained, educated in the Catholic Church, and when he had access to the Bible, which other people didn't because they were handwritten and chained up in monasteries, he realized that there were errors in the beliefs being taught by the Catholic Church, and so he attempted to bring those errors to the attention of the leadership of the church and to correct them so that the church would be preaching truth, and instead they kicked him out, and thus began the Protestant Reformation in 1520. So in Daniel 11 it talks about this, 11:32, those who do wickedly against the covenant being against God and against his people, shall be corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. So we have people fleeing to the mountains, hiding in the caves, hand writing the Bible. 11:33, and those of the people who understand shall instruct many. So the gospel spread, the truths of the Bible spread like wildfire. Yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and the flame, by captivity and plunder. So we see all kinds of persecution for 1260 years. We see martyrs burned at the stake. And we know that when they were burnt at the stake and they threw the ashes in the river trying to make them go away, symbolically the ashes went down the river and all over the world, and they actually were instrumental in their death in converting many people to the truth. So Daniel 11:34, now when they fall, they shall be added with a little help, but many shall join them by intrigue. 35, and though some of those who understand shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it shall stand for the appointed time. 36, then the king shall do according to his own will. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. This is almost word for word paraphrase of Revelation 13, which we read earlier. So you can see similarities between this and 2 Thessalonians, where Paul writes, the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God and that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself as God. So you can see Daniel 11 is following this sequence of these same world powers that were impacting God's people right down to the Dark Ages. Daniel 11:37, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers or the desire of women. We believe the desire of women has to do with the celibacy of the priesthood in the Catholic Church, or regard of any god, for he shall exalt himself above them all. Verse 38, but in their place he shall honor a god of fortress, a god which his fathers did not know, who shall honor gold and silver with precious stones and pleasant things. So then we get to verse 40, which is now what we're going to talk about in the next part. At that time, time of the end, the king of the south will attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, many ships, and up under the countries, overwhelm them and pass through. So we will get to that in the next segment. You can see that Daniel 10 through 12 is a overview of the time from Daniel's life clear through until Jesus comes, and that we have now reviewed the world powers that affected Israel, same ones that were in the other chapters in Daniel, and it will add more detail in the gap between Michael standing up in chapter 12, and the end of these world empires. There's a gap in there in verses 40 and 45, which we will discuss in the next segment, part 17. So the question is, why do you think it's important for Jesus to explain once again to Daniel about the sequence of world powers before prophesying about the time of the end and Jesus' return in Daniel 12? Well, I think it's important because once again, it proves that God knows what he's doing. He knows ahead of time what's going to happen. And right down to the detail that we saw in Daniel 11, these world powers, I mean, he named them. He would say who's going to win and what battles and all of that. And it gives us confidence that God does in fact know what he's talking about. And that will give us reason to have faith in his prophecies that have to do with our day and into our futures. So personal reflection is, what can we learn from this that will help us this week to draw closer to Jesus and deepen our trust in him in the future? Something to ponder. What can we learn that will help us to draw closer to Jesus? I think it's important that we build on our faith and our trust in Jesus. Not only can we look in the rearview mirror and see how God has led his people down through history, even when they were persecuted, but we can translate that into a future of faith and trust in God's Bible when Jesus himself gives clues of what's going to happen in the future in potentially our very day.